The night in Seoul seemed carefully sculpted to reflect power, beauty, and illusion. From atop the Hansol Palace Hotel, the main ballroom exuded luxury, with golden chandeliers casting warm reflections on crystal glasses and impeccable marble. It was the kind of event that would have the next day's newspapers splashing headlines about the success of President Yong-jin, the man whose perfect image fueled both admiration and fear. Around him, businessmen, politicians, and socialites laughed with practiced enthusiasm, toasting prosperity, unaware that behind every smile shimmered the harbinger of tragedy, carefully disguised as celebration. At the center of all this drama, Yong-jin naturally displayed the woman who had taken his wife's place, Han Ji-min, the lover who wore red as if defying fate itself. Her haughty gaze reflected triumph, and her smile, cold and restrained, seemed to savor the humiliation of others. The audience saw a radiant couple, but every gesture hid a calculation. Every touch a stroke of authority, every word an open wound. Eun-seo, his legitimate wife, walked between the tables with a silver tray in her hands, serving dinner to the guests as if she were a simple servant. Dressed in black and white, she seemed invisible, but it was impossible to ignore her. Her serene, pale face contrasted with the silent chaos that devoured her heart. Every averted glance, every muffled whisper, every suppressed laugh testified to the elegant cruelty that Yong-jin had transformed into a spectacle. As she approached her husband, the glass on the tray trembling slightly, he tilted his face and, in a dry, cruel voice, whispered, "Be careful not to spill it. You've always had trouble handling valuable things." The world seemed to freeze for a moment. Jimin stifled a laugh. The guests held their breath. Eun-seo, however, didn't react. Her eyes remained calm, and a slight movement of her lips hinted at something no one there could decipher, a mixture of resignation and promise. The clock read 10:47 p.m. when the photographer asked for the traditional happy couple photo. Yong-jin stood, raised his glass, and pulled his lover by the waist. The flashes illuminated the lie with the same force with which they blinded the truth. In the background, Eun-seo put down the tray, straightened her uniform, and looked at her husband for the last time. There was something new in her gaze. Not hatred, nor despair, but the absolute calm of someone who has already made a decision. As the applause rang out, she muttered to herself, low enough for only fate to hear, "Let this be the last cup." The public still saw only a humiliated woman, but what was born there was not weakness. It was the beginning of a patient and silent revenge. After all, how far can a wounded woman go when she transforms pain into power? If this story captivated you from the very first moment, subscribe now and activate the bell to follow every twist and turn. Leave a like and tell us in the comments, what would you do if the love of your life humiliated you in front of everyone? The morning after the banquet, Seoul was shrouded in thick fog. From the top of the glass building of Hansol Group, Yong-jin, he watched the horizon as if contemplating a conquered kingdom. The reflection in the glass showed an impeccable man. A neat suit, erect posture, a cold gaze. Nothing in his appearance betrayed the emotional storm he had provoked the night before. For him, the scandal had been nothing more than a lesson. In his mind, humiliation, Eun-seo, it wasn't cruelty, it was control. A reminder that she needed to know her place. Yong-jin was the kind of man shaped by pressure and pride. From a young age, he learned that feelings were weakness and that pity was a luxury for those without power. Raised by a tyrannical father and an absent mother, he grew up with the idea that love was nothing more than a distraction. His marriage to Eun-seo was strategic, a convenient union between wealthy families, a perfect alliance to strengthen the empire he would inherit. There was never room for affection, only expectation. He saw his wife as an extension of the image he needed to maintain, a beautiful, polite, silent woman, a social ornament. In the office, the assistants moved in silence. No one dared interrupt the CEO when his back was to the city. His silence was known to all, the kind of silence that weighs more heavily than shouting. When the marketing director entered to discuss a proposal, Yong-jin raised a hand and the man stopped before he could even open his mouth. One look was enough to make him retreat. This was the true portrait of power, domination through fear. But behind the unshakable facade, something was beginning to gnaw. There was a subtle irritation, a nagging memory of Eun-seo's serene expression as she served the guests. That calmness bothered him. He expected tears, pleas, any sign of weakness, but all he received was silence. And her silence haunted him like a mirror reflecting what he feared most, his own insignificance. At the end of the day, Yong-jin got into his luxury car and looked out the window at the stream of ordinary people crossing the avenue. He wondered, briefly, what it would be like to live without the burden of being feared. The thought disturbed him, and he pushed it away with a sip of whiskey. He turned on the radio, and a melancholy song filled the air. For a second, his face softened and then hardened again, as if the emotion had been a mistake to be corrected. As the car glided through the illuminated avenues, he took out his cell phone and opened an old photo. His wedding with Eun-seo, both young, smiling, a portrait that seemed from another life. He sighed, but pride prevailed. He deleted the image and put the phone in his pocket, like someone burying a past they'd rather forget. The driver asked discreetly, "Sir, are we going back home?" Yong-jin took a few seconds before answering. "No, take me to the Red." The Red was the favorite restaurant of Han Ji-min, the lover who now occupied the space that had once been his wife. He knew she would be there, and he relished this sense of predictable dominance, the power to be desired, to be feared, to be admired. The car disappeared into the fog, while in another part of the city, a woman folded her last clothes, looking out the window at the same fog that surrounded her. Eun-seo took a deep breath, with the calm expression of someone who has already made a decision with no turning back. And while Yong-jin thought he had everything under control, fate was already silently moving the pieces that would make him lose everything, starting with someone he never imagined he would face, the woman he humiliated. The Red was the kind of place that exuded power and vanity. Yellowish lights, crystal glasses reflecting red hues, and tables where corporate secrets mingled with confessions disguised as caresses. That night, Han Ji-min already, waiting for him, dressed as if she knew exactly what effect she would have. The red dress molded to her body like a warning. She didn't need to ask for attention. She dominated it. When Yong-jin, as she entered, the atmosphere seemed to tilt in her favor. The waiters bowed, eyes turned, and the mistress gave a slow, studied, almost feline smile. They made a dangerous pair. Ji-min was the flame that fueled Yong-jin's pride, and he was the mirror in which she saw her own ambition reflected. They both knew that what united them wasn't love, it was power. A silent game where every touch had a price and every look hid calculation. She approached slowly, touched his hand on the table, and said in a sweet yet sharp tone, "You did the right thing yesterday. A woman like her never suited the man you've become." The phrase was meant as a compliment, but it carried the venom of contempt. Yong-jin simply smiled, satisfied to hear what he wanted to believe. As dinner progressed, Ji-min talked about travel, galas, and future investments. But her true investment was emotional. She instilled in Yong-jin the need to have her as the ultimate trophy. He, vain, absorbed every word, like a man feeding on his own reflection. Between glasses, Jimin let slip a seemingly innocent comment. It's curious how Eun-seo didn't react. Maybe she already knew what awaited her. For a brief moment, Yong-jin's gaze hardened. His wife's name still provoked an unease he pretended not to feel. Jimin noticed the effect and smiled inwardly. She knew what she was doing. Seduction was just part of the game. The real pleasure lay in watching a powerful man slowly lose control. Her soft voice contrasted with her calculating gaze. Great men only become legends when they learn to let go of what binds them to the past, she whispered, leaning close enough for her scent to mingle with the air. Yong-jin raised his glass and toasted to the future, unaware that with that gesture he was signing his own downfall. At that moment, as he was lulled by his lover's words across the city, Eun-seo was sliding an envelope into a suitcase. The curtains were open, and moonlight bathed the room in a pale light. She looked at an old wedding photo, and for the first time in years, smiled, not in memory, but in liberation. And while Yong-jin sank into the false glow of love that poisoned him, Eun-seo silently prepared the gift that would transform that humiliation into his redemption. The next day, the hall of the Hansol. Palace it looked like a battlefield disguised as luxury. There were wilted flowers on the table, forgotten glasses with leftover wine, and a faint scent of perfume mixed with resentment. Eun-seo, serene as someone who had cried all she needed to, walked among the remains of the party, observing what was left, not of the celebration, but of her dignity. The silence that filled the space was almost sacred, as if the entire universe awaited her final decision. As she discreetly gathered up the crumpled napkins and fallen flowers, her eyes fell on the still intact cake. The confection seemed to mock her, a monument to the previous night's farce. He approached slowly, running his fingertips over the white frosting, and smiled mirthlessly. This cake didn't symbolize a new cycle. It was the tomb of a marriage. In the reflection of the silver knife, she saw her own face, weary but determined. He knew what came next would require courage, and she finally had it. Hours later, Yong-jin arrived home smelling of whiskey and someone else's perfume. He found Eun-seo standing in the living room, her posture impeccable, her gaze so steady that for a moment he hesitated. She greeted him with disconcerting calm, poured him a glass of water and said, "I hope you enjoyed the party." He laughed dismissively, sitting down on the sofa. "You outdid yourself, Eun-seo. You served well. Perhaps you found your true calling." She just nodded, and the silence that followed was so deep that the sound of the clock on the wall seemed to echo. As he climbed the stairs, Eun-seo headed to her office, locked the door, and opened the secret drawer where she kept a folder of documents. Inside, months of preparation lay. Revised contracts, powers of attorney, discreet signatures, all done with surgical precision. Each piece of paper represented a portion of Yong-jin's fortune, which, unbeknownst to her, was already being transferred into their son's name, Han Do-yoon. He sat down at the desk, took a deep breath, and sealed the last envelope with the final transfer stamp. In the corner of the paper, he wrote a date, October 22nd. The same day she had been humiliated, the same day she decided to be reborn. As she closed the envelope, a bolt of lightning lit up the sky outside, and for a moment she thought she heard her own soul whispering, "And now?" Outside the office, Yong-jin was on the phone with Jimin, promising him a luxurious gift, a limited edition watch. A cruel irony, because downstairs, his wife was preparing a gift he would never forget, a gift that couldn't fit in a box, but would forever change the course of their lives. The next morning, when the mailman collected a beige paper envelope with the postmark of Hansol Bank, no one imagined what that document contained. It was more than a financial record. It was the signature of a woman's freedom and the beginning of the fall of an empire. And while Yong-jin showed off his new watch to the world, unaware that time was already running out for him, Eun-seo discreetly disappeared, taking with her the heir and the secret that would make him beg for forgiveness. Dawn arrived covered in a fine rain, the kind that seems to wash away the past. The house of Yong-jin was in complete silence, the kind of silence that precedes a discovery that changes everything. When he went downstairs, still hungover from pride and alcohol, he noticed something strange. The coffee wasn't ready, the table wasn't set, and the soft sound of footsteps. Eun-seo had disappeared. He called her name once, twice, 3 times, but the only response was the empty echo of his own call. Restless, he walked through each room until he reached her bedroom. The curtains were open, and the wind blew the hems of the white dress that still rested on the chair. The suitcase at the foot of the bed was gone, as was the sound of life. On the dressing table stood only the blue necklace he had given her at the beginning of their marriage, the jewel he had always worn as a symbol of possession. Beside it, a wax-sealed envelope with his name written in delicate script. With trembling hands, Yong-jin broke the seal. Inside was a short letter, written with the serenity of someone not expecting a reply. "Don't worry. The heir to Hansol Group is safe, and far from the arrogance that destroys everything it touches. Don't look for me. I've served you enough." For a moment he didn't understand. Then it hit him like a sentence. Eun-seo had left. "Is this some kind of joke?" he muttered, more to himself than to the void. She ran downstairs, ordered the housekeeper to call the driver, demanded they check the security guards, cameras and gates. Nothing. She had disappeared with surgical precision, leaving no trace. She picked up the phone and called Han Jimin, his lover, trying to hide his unease. "She's gone." She took the boy. On the other end of the line, Jimin's voice sounded cold, calculated. "Then maybe it was what you deserved, Yong-jin. No woman can stand being a ghost for so long." The silence that followed was unbearable. He threw the phone against the wall, the sound of the impact echoing like a gunshot inside him. His pride, for the first time, wavered. Hours later, the headlines began to spread. Hansol Group CEO's wife mysteriously disappears with family heir. The press surrounded the building. Photographers shouted questions, and the man who once controlled everything watched his own empire crumble before the cameras and spotlights. That same morning, Eun-seo's image flashed across the screen at a low-key airport. He wore simple clothes and sunglasses. The small Do-yoon. He held her hand with confidence, not knowing that from that moment on he was leaving behind not only a home, but a story that would become the nightmare of a man who believed he was above everyone. And while the newspapers painted the escape as a scandal, no one imagined that Eun-seo's true disappearance was not that of a wife, but the birth of a woman who, silently, was about to rewrite the fate of an empire. The incessant sound of cameras and the popping of flashes transformed the entrance to Hansol Group in a media war zone. Journalists pushed microphones, security guards tried to contain the chaos, and amidst the maelstrom of voices, Yong-jin walked through the glass doors with the expression of someone trying to maintain a dignity that had already shattered inside. Each step was an effort to appear in control, but his tired eyes betrayed otherwise. He, the man who built an empire on coldness, now felt the weight of exposure. The disappearance of Eun-seo, it wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a corporate disaster. Inside the meeting room, the directors waited for him with tense looks. Headlines were everywhere. CEO's missing wife, heir taken without a trace, crisis in the Hansol Empire. Yong-jin sat at the head of the table and faced the executives, but the authority that once dominated the room seemed to have dissolved. One of the directors, his voice wavering, said what everyone feared. "Sir, investors are pulling away. There are rumors of embezzlement and documents that have gone missing. Inside, Yong-jin's pride burned like a hot iron. He stood, crossed the room, and looked out the window at the traffic moving like an anthill below. "You think I can't handle rumors?" he said with forced calm. "Hansol doesn't fall because of a woman." But even as he said those words, he knew he was lying. Eun-seo wasn't just a woman. She was the silent pillar of everything he had built. And now, without her, the empire was beginning to show cracks. In the days that followed, contracts were cancelled, partnerships fell apart, and former allies turned into voracious critics. The lover, Han Ji-min, who had once seemed willing to die for him, disappeared without warning. Only a message remained on his phone. "I do not sleep next to defeated men." He deleted the text, but the words remained etched, somewhere deeper than he cared to admit. The nights grew long and silent. The walls of the mansion, once a symbol of power, now echoed with memories. In every hallway, a ghost of Eun-seo seemed to watch him. Her calm voice, her subtle perfume, the sound of footsteps that would never return. Yong-jin began drinking heavily, trying to drown out the voices of his conscience, but nothing could drown out the image of her leaving home for the last time. And it was just in the early hours of the morning, when he thought the worst was over, that he received the call that would change everything. His personal lawyer, with a trembling voice, said he had discovered something in the financial files. "Sir, there are transactions in Do-yoon's name, accounts, stocks, properties. Everything now belongs to your son." The phone fell from his hands, and in that instant he understood. The disappearance hadn't been an emotional blow, but a strategic one. Eun-seo didn't run away from him. She dethroned him. The glass of whiskey fell from his hand and rolled across the floor, spilling the amber liquid over the expensive carpet. Yong-jin. He stood motionless, staring into space, while the lawyer's words echoed like thunder inside his head. "Everything is in your son's name." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The man who controlled millions, who believed he mastered the fate of everyone around him, now realized he had been defeated by the silence of a woman he deemed weak. And in that instant, something began to crack inside him. Not his pride, not yet, but the veil of illusion. Memories came flooding back. The first image was of a cold winter morning when Eun-seo. He prepared coffee with hands trembling with fatigue. He hurried downstairs, talking on the phone about mergers and stocks, and barely noticed the woman watching him tenderly. "You always forget to eat," she said with a small smile. He replied without looking, "I have more important things than coffee." That phrase, said so many times, now sounded like the epitaph for the love he himself had killed. Another memory struck him like a blade. The day she tried to hug him after a long trip. He pulled away, uncomfortable, and said coldly, "We don't need to appear to be a couple beyond appearances." Eun-seo stared at him for a few seconds, silent, and then simply replied, "One day, Yong-jin, you'll understand what it's like to be alone, even surrounded by people." He hadn't paid any attention at the time, but now those words echoed like a curse, finally coming true. She sat on the floor, her hands on her head, and saw flashes of forgotten moments. The day she waited until midnight for a promised dinner, the night she cried in her bedroom while he slept in his office, the way she smiled to hide her pain. Everything that once seemed routine was now a memory, and every memory was punishment. Over the next few days, Yong-jin began to look through old wedding albums. He ran his fingers over the photos of Eun-seo, observing every feature, every detail. "Why didn't you face me?" he murmured softly. "Why did you choose silence?" But deep down, he knew the answer. She had understood before he had that absence would be the deepest wound. One night, while walking through his empty office, he found a piece of paper forgotten in the drawer. It was an old, unsent letter, written in Eun-seo's own handwriting. I still believe there's good in you, even if the whole world says otherwise. But if one day you make me choose between pain and distance, I'll choose distance." The handwriting was gentle, but the message cut straight to his soul. Yong-jin read and reread it, and when he finished, he realized tears had stained the paper. For the first time in years, he wept not from loss but from regret. And it was in that moment of weakness that he heard her name again, not from the mouth of memories, but from someone alive, someone who was about to reveal what was really behind her escape. Eun-seo. The call came in the middle of the night, when Yong-jin tried to erase the memories with another sip of whiskey. The voice on the other end was strained, breathless. The private investigator he had hurriedly hired to track down Eun-seo. "Sir, I found something in the necklace, the same one she left on the table." Yong-jin straightened immediately, the glass still in his hand, his heart racing like it hadn't in a long time. "What do you mean? A necklace? She didn't take anything." There was a pause. On the other end of the line, before the investigator replied, his voice lowered. "It's best if you see for yourself." Half an hour later, the CEO walked through the gates of a private forensic lab, his face pale and his eyes filled with suppressed despair. On the glass table, the blue necklace lay disassembled. The pendant had been opened, and inside, hidden under a thin layer of metal, was a small data chip. Yong-jin leaned in, his eyes fixed on that harmless fragment of technology, and asked hoarsely, "What's in there?" The technician connected the chip to a laptop, and within seconds, a stream of spreadsheets, contracts, and emails appeared on the screen. The folders bore familiar names, departments, branches, international accounts. But as the pages unfolded, the terror began to take shape. It was evidence, indisputable evidence of financial manipulation, corruption, and money laundering within the Hansol Group. Hidden transactions, phantom accounts, contracts with non-existent and companies, everything tracked, dated, signed, and on every document there was Yong-jin's digital signature. He staggered back, his eyes wide, his face draining of color. "This is impossible," he muttered, but deep down he knew it wasn't. Eun-seo had always been there, silent, observing, taking notes. While he boasted of being unattainable, she collected, with surgical patience, everything that would one day bring him down. "She knew," the investigator said gravely, "and it seems she made a point of leaving that as her last memory." Yong-jin didn't answer. He stood there, motionless, staring at the screen, as if he could change the past with the power of regret alone. The jewel he had given his wife at the beginning of their marriage, a symbol of the love he believed to be eternal, had become his sentence. The blue necklace, the same one he had worn to mark his territory, now marked the beginning of his downfall. As he left the building, the early morning seemed colder than ever. He walked slowly, the sound of his own footsteps echoing on the wet sidewalk. With each step, the words from Eun-seo's letter came back to him. "I have served you enough." And he finally understood. She'd never wanted revenge, she'd only wanted justice. And somehow, she'd gotten both. On the horizon, the lights of Seoul flickered as if mocking him. The man who believed he could master time was now a prisoner of the past he had ignored. But the worst of the revelations was yet to come, because, in trying to repair what had been destroyed, Yong-jin would discover that Eun-seo had not only defeated him, she had learned to live without him. Time had become a kind of punishment for Yong-jin, a succession of long, heavy days that seemed to repeat the same empty sound of the hours. There were no longer meetings, invitations, or journalists waiting at the door. Only the echo of his own silence and the constant memory of a woman who, even absent, occupied every corner of his mind. The empire that had once defined who he was, had become ruins, and in the ruins he finally began to see the truth. Power without love is but a throne built on ashes. Tired of loneliness and driven by a guilt he could no longer silence, he decided to seek her out, not for control, but out of an almost desperate need to reconcile himself with something real. For weeks, he trawled through old contacts, wielded what remained of his influence, and rehired the investigator who had previously served only to track business deals. This time the request was different, to find Eun-seo no matter what. The clues were scarce, fragments of a trail erased with intelligence and calm. When the call finally came, the man's voice sounded charged with restrained tension. "Sir, we found something. She's alive and she lives on the island of Jeju, in a fishing village. She's with the boy." For a few seconds, Yong-jin remained silent, trying to grasp the weight of those words. Her name, spoken aloud, seemed to reignite something he had tried to extinguish. The next morning, the plane landed on the island, and the sea breeze hit him like a reminder of what is simple, what is pure, what he had forgotten. The rental car drove along narrow roads lined with plantations and the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks. When he got out, he saw in the distance a modest house, built of light wood, with open windows that let out the aroma of freshly brewed tea. For a moment, he hesitated. His heart, accustomed to negotiating figures, now trembled with a feeling he couldn't name. She was there, sitting near the window, calmly combing her hair, and when she saw him, she showed neither surprise nor emotion. She simply looked up, as if observing an echo from the past that no longer has the power to hurt. Yong-jin walked to the entrance and stood there, not daring to ring the doorbell. Then, with a choked voice, he said softly, almost as if confessing, "Eun-seo." She stood, went to the door, and stared at him. For a long time, and in that moment, time seemed suspended between the sound of the sea and the pent-up breathing of two strangers who had once loved each other. "Why did you come?" he asked in a calm tone, without anger, without tears. He hesitated before answering, and each word sounded like an unspoken plea for forgiveness. "I needed to see you. I needed to understand what was left of us." She kept her eyes fixed on him, and her expression held the strength of someone who is already freed. Herself. "There's nothing left, Yong-jin. What you destroyed wasn't love. It was the memory of it. I learned to live in the silence you taught me." For a moment he wanted to respond, but his throat closed. Then, before returning inside, she said with the calm of a sentence, "You made me serve shame, now serve repentance." The door closed slowly, and he stood there motionless, the wind carrying the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks, as if the entire sea were repeating the farewell he never knew how to hear. And as the horizon faded before his eyes, Yong-jin, he understood for the first time the true punishment of pride. It was not losing the one he loved, but realizing too late that forgetting her was the cruelest end of all. The days following the reunion in Jeju became the real hell of Yong-jin. Each dawn felt like a sentence, a cruel reminder that he had crossed the point of no return. Back in Seoul, the apartment once adorned with artwork and luxurious furnishings now felt like a mausoleum. The cold walls echoed his own breathing, and the hallways, once traversed with firm, arrogant steps, became labyrinths of memories he tried to avoid. The silence that once represented control had now become punishment. Little by little, news of his decline spread. The name Yong-jin, once a symbol of power, had become synonymous with shame and arrogance. The Hansel Group had sunk into investigations, and the council had quietly removed him, fearing his presence would be a constant reminder of the scandal. None of the people who had flattered him dared to summon him. The man who had once given orders was now ignored even by those who owed him obedience. The mistress, Han Ji-min, had completely disappeared, taking with it the last vestige of illusion. Only silence, regret, and the sound of the glasses he used to drown his own failure remained. During sleepless nights, Yong-jin wandered the house like a lost soul. He sat before the unlit fireplace, staring at the ashes, feeling as if they represented his own life. He remembered the face of Eun-seo, not the humiliated face at dinner, but that peaceful look she had on the island, the expression of someone who had found peace after going through hell. That memory gnawed at him more than any punishment from human justice, because he understood now that she had freed him, not destroyed him. And yet, he felt condemned. One morning he rose before the sun and went to his old office, the same one where he had once yelled, judged, and humiliated so many others. He opened the window and let the cold wind in. He looked out at the skyline of the city he had once ruled and whispered to himself, hoarse and weary, "I've lost everything money could buy, and everything it could never give me back." He stood there for long minutes, motionless, as if waiting for an answer that would never come. As the golden light of dawn filtered through the curtains, an envelope slid under the door. It was from Dohan Foundation. Inside was a simple letter, signed by Eun-seo, just 2 lines. "Repentance is the beginning of wisdom if you do not run away from it." And for the first time, Yong-jin. He didn't tear up the letter. He didn't reject it. He didn't deny it. He held it between his fingers carefully, as if touching something sacred, never imagining that those words would be just the prelude to the final destiny that awaited him, an unexpected encounter with his own karma. 5 years had passed since the last. Time Yong-jin, it saw Eun-seo, and time, merciless, had transformed him into an unrecognizable man. The glow of power had given way to the pallor of loneliness, and the name that had once opened doors now echoed like a forgotten whisper in the corporate corridors. He lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Seoul, supporting himself with the savings left after selling his confiscated assets. His expensive clothes were stored away, not out of attachment, but out of shame. The man who had once taken pride in his own reflection now avoided mirrors. Every wrinkle seemed a reminder of the price pride exacts when humility arrives too late. One morning, as he was reading the crumpled newspaper left by the door, a familiar name hit him like a punch. Dohan Foundation announces new social project led by young entrepreneur Han Do-yoon. The report was accompanied by a photograph. The boy was now a teenager with a firm posture and a serene gaze, the same look he recognized from his mother's face. Beside him, Eun-seo, she smiled with the lightness of someone who had found what money could never buy: peace. The foundation she had created had become a symbol of hope for abandoned women and children, the exact opposite of the coldness and arrogance that defined the Han-seol era. With a heavy heart, Yong-jin made his way to the inauguration venue. He stood at a distance among the crowd, observing unnoticed. The auditorium was lit by stained glass windows, and in the center, Do-yoon spoke about empathy and starting over. "My mother taught me that true power lies not in commanding, but in understanding. That every fall can become a bridge, if you have the courage to look down and move forward." His son's words echoed within him like real daggers. Eun-seo, sitting in the front row, applauded him with discreet tears in her eyes, not of pain, but of pride. When the event ended, she stood up, and as she left, her eyes met Yong-jin's for a brief moment. There was no anger, no longing, only compassion. Unable to hold her gaze, he lowered his head, feeling that this silent gesture was worth more than any verbal forgiveness. Eun-seo walked on with her son, surrounded by journalists and applause, while he remained motionless, like a shadow, finally accepting his fate. That night, Upon returning home, Yong-jin opened the same blue necklace he'd kept since its discovery. Inside, next to the empty chip, was a small photograph. Eun-seo and Do-yoon smiling in front of the foundation. He placed it on the table, lit a candle, and murmured, his voice trembling, "True power is loving without possessing." And it was that night, under the dim light of the solitary flame, that Yong-jin realized that karma still had one last lesson to teach him, one that would come not with words, but with the soft sound of remembrance that awaited him at the table where it all began. The house was plunged into a silence that seemed to breathe with it. Outside, the city was alive with horns, lights, and haste, but inside that small apartment time had stopped. Yong-jin, he sat at the table, the same one where he had so often raised glasses, shouted orders, and undone feelings. Now, on the simple tablecloth, there was only a small cake bought at the corner bakery with a single blue candle, the same color as the necklace that had marked the beginning and end of his story with Eun-seo. He took a deep breath, and for a moment the sound of the wind against the window merged with a distant memory. Her laughter, her serene gaze, her soft voice saying, "Happy birthday." He lit the candle with trembling hands and watched the flame dance slowly, casting shadows across the walls. The flickering reflection reminded him of all the faces that had faded along his journey, employees who feared him, partners who flattered him, lovers who used him, and a woman who, even humiliated, knew how to transform pain into freedom. His entire past seemed to sit before him, watching him silently, waiting for a confession that never came. He closed his eyes and for a moment imagined that Eun-seo was there, smiling, cutting the cake with his son. The home lit up, the sound of the sea echoing in the background. But when he opened his eyes, all that remained was emptiness, a heavy, cruel, and paradoxically serene emptiness, as if pride had finally surrendered to peace. With a slow breath, he blew out the candle and murmured, "Happy birthday, Eun-seo." The smoke rose in thin spirals, drawing in the air. The goodbye he'd never had the courage to say. The next moment, a silent tear ran down his face and fell onto the table, mingling with the reflection of the flame still burning at the tip of the wick. Outside, the wind blew hard, making the windows vibrate, as if the world responded with a final whisper of forgiveness. As the frame froze, the camera slowly pulled back, showing Yong-jin's mall before the immensity of the empty room. The final image showed him from behind, illuminated only by the dim light of the candle, while the narration echoed softly. Humiliated love was reborn as justice, and pride as eternal solitude. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel now to accompany other intense narratives like this one, stories of love, redemption, and destiny that reveal the most human side behind every silence. Your next thrill starts in the next video.